we are here on the same page. So this is the webinar about CAEL, CELPIP, and IELTS. We're going to be answering today any questions that you have regarding these three different exams. And as we're waiting for attendees to join us, I just want to introduce ourselves a little bit. My name is Maciej Blazik. I'm the director of Summerhill Online Academy, an online language preparation school. We provide CAEL, CELPIP, and IELTS preparation online with live teachers in small groups. Previously, I've worked as a professor in various colleges in Toronto, mostly specializing in preparation for IELTS, CELPIP, CAEL, and also teaching business communication and creative writing. So I've worked with, I've actually have quite a lot of specialty teaching and coaching students who are looking to pass IELTS at a fairly high level. I have quite a wealth of knowledge about IELTS and IELTS techniques. And joining me today is Patrick Macaron and Anna Baxter from Paragon Testing Enterprises, and they are going to be able to help us answer any questions about CAEL and CELPIP. So Anna and Patrick, would you guys introduce yourselves for us, please?
Well, thank you for the introduction, Maciej. Yes, so we are both working at Paragon Testing Enterprises, and for my background is in linguistics as well. So I used to be an ESL, EFL instructor many years ago, and then I started working at various test centers over the past 10 years and currently working at Paragon. But it's been great to be hosting this live as well as just talking about all the different products that we provide. So thank you for inviting us today. Patrick?
Yeah, thanks, Anna, and thanks, Maciej, as well. Yeah, we're really happy to be here. And yeah, a little bit about myself. So I got my bachelor's degree in social work a while back. Time flies. I feel like I'm getting old. But yeah, so I studied social work, and then I went into the nonprofit sector where I was helping newcomers and job seekers apply for work, prepare them for interviews. And then I moved over to language classes, so English language training for newcomers. And now I'm here with Paragon helping to support and build the awareness for our English test, CAEL and CELPIP. So it gives me a broad understanding of some of the different challenges that newcomers face when they come to Canada. And yeah, I think this is a great webinar because a lot of the webinars that we do typically focus on one of our tests, but this will give you a great overview of the different options that you have available. So thanks again, Maciej.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Just want to remind the audience that anyone who's participating today is going to get a free, they're going to receive CELPIP and CAEL materials, free CELPIP and CAEL materials from Paragon Testing Enterprises, valued at $55. So if you were attending, you're getting that free today. So that's really nice. Thanks for that support, guys, from Paragon. So if you have any more information, you can also contact www.summerhillonlineacademy.com. And you can find me also. So in any case, this is what we're going to do. First of all, we're going to do a brief overview of all three exams. I'm going to talk mostly about IELTS. Patrick is the expert. He's going to talk about CELPIP. And Anna is the expert in CAEL. She is going to talk about CAEL and ask any questions regarding CAEL. So basically, we're going to go ahead and just focus on all three of these aspects. And guys, remember, there's a Q&A section. If you have any questions whatsoever, please go right ahead and ask those questions. So first of all, which of these exams have you guys taken before? So just a quick question. And guys, you can go to pollev.com and /MaciejBłaszczyk240. And you can go ahead and just choose which of these things, because this is actually going to help us here to see if anyone has actually taken any of these tests from our audience here. And again, these are
CELPIP General seems to be very popular right now.
It does. Okay, so a lot of people here. I'm also just going to give a few minutes here for others to try to log in.
Oh yes, can we put the link? Let's see if I can do that. I'll actually do that.
Okay, here
I'll
we
put
go.
the link here. And
CELPIP LS. Okay. Okay.
okay.
Okay. There's still IELTS General people.
Okay, and for anybody viewing us today, I've just included the link so you can go ahead and vote in the polls and you can participate.
Okay, so it seems predominantly it's pretty much split between IELTS General, so mostly for immigration purposes, I would say. So mostly purposes, but the second question would be, which exam are you most interested in at this point? Okay, CAEL. Okay, some academic IELTS people here too.
Yeah.
Okay, just moving through. Okay, so, all right, so perfect. We're going to be focusing on all of these exams, but we're going to have lots of questions about IELTS Academic in CAEL. And again, I'm actually surprised that a lot of people are interested in CAEL because CAEL is actually the least popular of the exams that we're looking at today. So this is good that the awareness is there. So let's go ahead and again, what is the purpose of your future language exam? Okay.
I really do like how the polls show up. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Okay, a lot of permanent residency PR people. Okay. 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 Few ICC. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we see a little, the majority of people are looking here for immigration purposes, for permanent residency. And again, it makes a lot of sense because for citizenship, usually the standards for citizenship are much, much lower. So the score that you need to get is much, much lower. But let's go ahead and begin. Let's get straight into this. So we're going to go straight into answering lots of questions. I see some of you guys are having your hands up. Guys, if you have your hands up, at this moment, I'm going to still wait a little bit, but there will be opportunities for you guys to ask questions. And guys, don't hesitate to start with the Q&A. If you have any questions at the moment, begin with Q&A. We'll be monitoring. But okay, let's go ahead and start talking about these exams. So first of all, we have IELTS Academic and IELTS General Training. So there are two versions of IELTS. Now the IELTS Academic is, again, it's $345, and the IELTS General is also currently $345. So actually I was looking at the prices in Toronto, and I was looking at ILSC, as well as a few other test centers in Toronto. They're both IELTS General and both IELTS Academic are basically $345. So the academic is obviously for post-secondary education, and IELTS General is for permanent residency and citizenship education. Both of the exams last about 3 hours. And what's interesting about IELTS is that usually the actual test is about 2 hours and 45 minutes, plus an additional 15 minutes for the speaking. However, the speaking portion has to be scheduled differently. Now, currently, IELTS offers these tests in person, so they have a PBT or a paper-based version of the test. So you can sit in the center and actually write things down on a piece of paper and fill in the blanks from the listening and from the reading on a piece of paper. And for the speaking, there you sit down with a live examiner and you actually talk to someone. Because of COVID-19, currently all interviews, all speaking tests are conducted virtually. So if you do the electronic version, the online, the computer-based version rather, you still have to do it in a CELPIP center, and you have to you do it on a computer, and then you schedule a live face-to-face meeting with an examiner who will then give you the actual speaking test. What's interesting about the speaking test, though, that sometimes for the speaking portion, you actually have to schedule it for a different day. It's very rare that you'll be able to do the speaking test for the IELTS on the very same day as you're doing the listening, reading, and writing. Sometimes you have to schedule a different day. Sometimes you have to wait for hours in order to get that exam. So even though it's the test is somewhere around, the whole actual test procedures are just about under 3 hours. The test for IELTS usually takes your whole day. You're waiting to sit for the CELPIP center, you're doing the test, and then you're waiting again for the speaking test. And again, when you're waiting for the speaking test, you don't have access to your telephone. You're still you're scanned. You're actually, they use a metal detector to check through you. You're fingerprinted. You're placed into a particular area where you have to wait. So you're actually in a state of isolation as you're waiting for your speaking test as well, because you've already been processed. So every time you want to, let's say, leave that waiting area and go to the bathroom or something, you have to get reprocessed, or again, they have to check your ID. They have to check check you out with a metal detector before you actually enter the speaking portion as well. So just keeping that in mind. Now, from Paragon Testing Enterprises, there are 3 products we're going to talk about. CAEL, which is for the post-secondary admissions. This is academic it's not only for post-secondary admissions, but it's designed for post-secondary admissions. And then there's CELPIP, which is for permanent residency. And then there's, CELPIP General, which is exactly for Canadian citizenship. It's only for Canadian citizenship. And we're going to talk about all of them. What's interesting is, again, CAEL and CELPIP, they are 3 hours. What's interesting is that IELTS is described as being 3 hours, but CAEL and CELPIP is 3 hours in front of a computer non-stop. There's no other schedules or anything like that. There are no pauses in between. And it is actually possible for you to finish CELPIP and CAEL faster, because as you go through the sections in CELPIP and CAEL, you can skip to the next portion if you finish. You actually can't do that with IELTS. You have to wait for the test to complete before the next section begins. So for the IELTS, you are given those 3 hours and you have to use those 3 hours. So if you're not using them, you're expected to keep scanning or revising or reviewing, but you can't skip to the next section. And I think, Anna, you said there's a record in the CELPIP Center for how quickly someone finished CELPIP?
Yeah, so we've had some students. We've had some students that have finished in 1.5 hours the CELPIP test, and then that's it, they've completed it. So yeah, it really depends on your skills. Now, just to sort of modify a little bit, the CAEL test is actually 3.5 hours, but it's still the same process where you're doing a section, and if, let's say, for example, your reading skills are a little bit better, and you finish the section faster, you can continue. So you don't need to wait till everybody else finishes that section. You just continue, and it goes basically on your own rhythm. And if you want to complete it fully, you would prefer to have all the time necessary, then for the CAEL, it'll be 3.5. For CELPIP, it's 3 hours, but it really depends on each person individually.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yes.
Okay, that's good, but it's possible to finish earlier. I don't know about the CELPIP LS, because the CELPIP LS is just 1 hour. It's also much cheaper. It's only $195, but it's only listening and speaking, right? Right.
Yes, that's right.
So it's only those 2 sections. Again, which is interesting because with IELTS General, you can take IELTS for your citizenship, but you actually have to take all of those 4 sections. Yes, the government will only care about your results from the speaking and the listening when you do the IELTS for Canadian citizenship, but you're still forced to take all of those 4 sections regardless of the fact that you just need scores from those two sections. So you actually have to sit through the whole thing. So it's nice that CELPIP LS is a little bit shorter in that respect. It's a little bit less stressful too. So in any case, I want to talk more about IELTS for today, and I'm going to let Anna talk more about CAEL and Patrick talk more about CELPIP today. So first of all, let's talk about the IELTS format. So as I mentioned before, there is an academic and general training, right? There's an academic IELTS and a CELPIP and a general IELTS. However, for IELTS general and for IELTS academic, the listening and speaking sections are the same. There's absolutely no difference between the listening and the speaking versions of the IELTS general and academic. The only difference, of course, is the academic reading and writing versus the general training reading and writing. But even in those sections, the academic reading and the writing, there are remarkable similarities. For example, with IELTS general, basically writing task 1 and writing task 1 for academic are very, very different. For general IELTS, it's a letter. So you're basically general training IELTS task 1, it's a letter. You're asked a question, you have 3 bullet points, and you have to write a letter with a variable tone. Sometimes these letters are to business partners, sometimes these letters are to employers or to professors. Sometimes the letters are even targeted towards friends, right? But for the academic writing, you actually have to do graphs and charts. There's a kind of an advantage if you've already done IELTS academic and then you're transitioning for IELTS general, because if you're doing IELTS academic, and you've done, for example, IELTS academic for post-secondary education, and now you need IELTS general for your permanent residency, transitioning from one to another could actually be a little bit easier because there's so many similarities because you've already trained for the listening and you've already trained your skills for the speaking. And in many ways, just training your skills for the writing also helps because with IELTS general and academic, writing task 1 is very different. But for general task 1, 2 is very different. Now, I just want to mention that general task 1 IELTS and CELPIP general task 1 writing are virtually the same. So if you're preparing for IELTS, if you've prepared for IELTS general before for task 1, and you're trying to transition to CELPIP, it's also very easy because these two tasks are almost exactly the same. So if you take a look at these examples for general writing task 1 for CELPIP and IELTS, if you take a look at these, it's really hard to see which one's IELTS and which one's CELPIP because they're almost exactly the same. They're almost word for word in terms of context. And from my perspective, I always thought that the task 1 is so similar for IELTS and for CELPIP because it's something of an expectation from the government and what they want. Anna and Patrick, could you clarify that?
Yeah, it's basically meant to mimic sort of what you would do on a regular basis. So it's like writing an email. So if it's a letter of complaint, if it's a letter of invitation, so it's meant to be something that is a bit more realistic. So it's going to be very similar, and obviously the government will accept it because it's something that would happen on a day-to-day regular basis.
Yeah, it's remarkable. CELPIP and IELTS general task 1, it's hardly, I can hardly see any difference. They seem very much the same. So if if you're good at general IELTS task 1, you'll be good at CELPIP task 1. When I teach these, I always teach these the same way. They're really the same explanations. And again, I have a lot of writing workshops that you guys can take a look at these. However, for general and IELTS task 2, it's completely different here because writing task 2, the IELTS for general and for academic is virtually the same. It's an essay and it's 250 words, which is different from CELPIP because CELPIP task 2 is 150 words. So it's much shorter. So it's actually the same length as task 1. But for academic and general IELTS task 2, it's 250 words. And I'm always very surprised by general task 2, the essay, because for general IELTS, I don't know why you have to write such an academic task. And so I actually, it's really very, very much the same as the academic test in the sense that you actually have to learn 3 different essay formats. I usually call these type A, B, C, which is a counter argument argument, or a three body paragraph supportive essay, or something called a type C, where you show a problem and solution in each body paragraph. There's about 5% or 6% chance that you will get a type C question where you cannot answer your IELTS task 2 more effectively or completely without using a type C. This is kind of rare now, but it was more common in the earlier IELTS exams, but it still shows up once in a while where you have to do a type C. So again, you have to learn all 3 of these types of essays, and they're very, very technical, right? There's almost no difference between the general and the academic essay format, but also the questions themselves. I mean, the questions are more general for the general test, and the questions for the academic are more academic. But honestly, if you take a look at those questions from both sides, they're virtually the same. They talk, I mean, because the IELTS the academic IELTS task 2 is meant to be an academic task in format, but the topic is supposed to be general enough for everybody to understand. What's also important to note that the criteria is the same for the general and academic IELTS. There is no, they are not looking for more academic vocabulary, less academic vocabulary when they're looking for IELTS task 2. The format and the criteria are the same. So it's very challenging because for general IELTS, you still have to learn that academic essay. And it's very technical. The questions are very, very tricky. But for CELPIP, on the contrast, task 2 is different. It's actually a survey question. So it is kind of like an essay format, honestly. It is, and using a more of an essay format is actually preferable. But again, it's 150 words, and there are only 2 formats that you have to learn. So actually, students have to learn only these 2 formats. So a type A and type E. A type A is just you agree and you provide 2 body paragraphs to show why you agree with a particular choice. And with type B, you're asked, to what extent do you think this is your choice is a good idea, and what are the problems with the alternative choice? And those are the only 2 formats, and the questions are never trickier than that. You're really just given 2 questions and asked to do one of those 2 formats. It's very clearly described. So I mean, you know, it's 90% of the time, it's also going to be a type A. So even if you just learn one essay type, you have a 90% chance of making it. And again, as I mentioned before, the CELPIP task 2 questions are not even close to being as tricky as the IELTS task 2 questions for both general academic. There's just no difference between the academic and the general standard in that respect, and the questions are very, very tricky. And again, it's 150 words for both task 1 and task 2 for CELPIP, which makes it a lot shorter, right? And again, they're non-academic topics with IELTS. Even for general and like even for general topics, they may not be academic. They might be general, but they are still quite tricky and ask you very general questions, which are more like philosophical about points of view. Well, task 2 is very, very straightforward. Patrick, do you want to add anything about the CELPIP task 2 topics?
Yeah, basically they're going to be general everyday life kind of situation. So an example question could be that you're living in a small town and the town is having basically like a vote to all the people that live in the town. Would you like us, we have a piece of land here that's not being used. Would you like us to put a shopping mall, or would you like us to develop a park there where people can get exercise? So there's no wrong answer. You're basically picking a side and supporting why do you think this choice is better than the other. But there's no wrong answer, and yeah, it's a general everyday life kind of situation.
Yeah, and again, it's very specific situations that you get to choose and support. With IELTS, it's a little bit similar, but the topics are a little bit even more general, making them more difficult. For example, with IELTS General Task 2 topics, they'll ask you, what do you think is more important for success, friends or family? And so you have to find the reasoning yourself. You have to get a little bit philosophical in a sense and come up with those ideas. Well, in CELPIP, those ideas that are pretty straightforward, you just have to expand and extend that topic further. So I
And
find.
usually the topics, at least for CELPIP, for the task 2 writing, it's always about community or about workplace. So they'll
Yeah.
ask you, okay, in your community, we're building this. Do you prefer this or that? Or in your workplace, we're thinking about putting a gym or a restaurant. What would you prefer? So it's always community or workplace based, but that pretty much will be the two options that you have there.
Yeah, but with IELTS, even with IELTS General Task 2, the questions are quite convoluted. They are they require at least, you have to choose at least 3 types of essay formats. There are no hints at all to which format you're supposed to do. While with CELPIP, you actually know which format you have to do. They specifically tell you a type A or type B because they show you either 2 questions or 1 question. So it's very straightforward. But with Task 2, you have to actually choose the format, and you can use more than 1 format to actually answer the question, but you have to answer it completely. I can't emphasize enough how general and academic IELTS Task 2 is very, very tricky, and how much preparation you have to do. With CELPIP, it's actually a lot less. And you can just see the slide here, 3 very complex types of essays between compared with 2 very simple formats. So this is why it's much more straightforward, let's just say, for CELPIP. So in any case, for IELTS and general and academic, again, just task 2 is the same. Task 1 is different. That's the only difference for writing for IELTS between IELTS general academic. Again, listening, academic and general, same. Speaking, academic, general, the same. Task 1, academic and general, different. Task 2, academic and general, pretty much the same. Right? So, and again, the reading is also different for IELTS academic and general. For general, you're given 4 short passages and 1 long script. Now, the 4 short passages, they're 4 short, many little passages. Sometimes they're menus, sometimes they are flyers, sometimes they're just short letters or emails or little articles. And then the one long script, which is about 1.5 pages long script, and which is equivalent to an academic, one of the 3 academic tasks. And again, with academic writing, you're given 3 long scripts. And the scripts are usually 1.5 or sometimes even 2 pages long, and they're long scripts, and you have to do 3 of them. For the academic writing, the 3 long scripts are progressively harder. With the general, the 1 long script is equivalent to the difficulty of a good academic task reading section 2. So it's not particularly easy, but what's also interesting, what similarity between the IELTS general academic is that you have exactly the same kinds of questions. So even though with the general IELTS, there are 4 shorter scripts and 1 long script, and for IELTS academic, there are just 3 long scripts, you're still presented with an option or you're going to be faced with 14 different styles of questions. You may not always get 14 different styles of questions, but there will be 14 types of questions that you actually need to prepare for before you're ready for the IELTS reading. And that's for academic in general, the style of questions, including multiple choice. But then there's something like identifying information, identifying the writer's views and claims. So identifying the writer's views and claims is very tricky. These are called the yes, no, not given questions, extremely tricky questions. Then there's the matching information and matching headings. Matching headings is very, very tricky as well, because you have to match a paragraph with a particular heading which paraphrases. So you have to know the general idea, not specific information. So, and again, there's table completion, flow charts, there are maps that you have to fill out. So there are 14 different kinds of questions, and you have to prepare separately for all of these 14 different questions, because all 14 questions, different types of questions, have a different way of, you have to understand how they work, right? And you have to learn a technique for it. That makes it very, very tricky and a lot of preparation for both general and IELTS. Now, the good thing is if you've already prepared for academic IELTS and you've done a very good job, then IELTS general will be much easier for you to transition for in respect to the reading, because you already know all those 14 different difficult types of questions that you've spent hours and hours reading. So you can really, you use that knowledge that you've learned from the academic to the general. With the CELPIP reading, on the other hand, it's actually just 4 short passages, and really the questions themselves are really straightforward. They're just fill in the blanks and multiple choice. That's it. They're actually all multiple choice, pretty much. It's just basically a drop-down menu, and so it's just one type of question, multiple choice. There's no fill in the blanks. There's no flow charts. What's also, so I mean, if you just learn multiple choice and the technique for multiple choice, you're pretty much okay with CELPIP reading for all 4 sections. There's no surprises for you, right? With IELTS, I mean, you have to, you don't know which kind of question. Maybe today you're going to get a matching question. Maybe tomorrow you'll just get multiple choice, or you get a flow chart. And there's always a combination of these 4 or 5 different kinds of questions for each test. But with CELPIP, it's just multiple choice. So it's a lot less preparation that you need to do in terms of learning question types. It's more about being able to be more proficient at reading, skimming, and scanning, rather than actual question types. Do you guys want to add anything about CELPIP?
Yeah, I was just going to say, given that it's multiple choice for the CELPIP reading section, the right answer will be there. So oftentimes when you're looking at the answer choices, there might be 2 of them that you know right away, those are not the right answer. I know that for sure. So you can just kind of mentally eliminate the incorrect ones right at the beginning and narrow down to the 2 answer choices you're maybe deciding between. Another thing about the reading, you don't lose marks for choosing the wrong answer. So don't leave anything blank, even if you are running out of time or you don't know the answer to a particular multiple choice reading question. Just pick something, because you'll give you'll give yourself a chance at getting a higher score. So don't leave any questions blank. Answer every single question.
I always advise my students never to leave any blanks in the IELTS reading as well, because there are multiple choices and you can choose A, B, or C. However, with IELTS, there are fill in the blanks where there are no multiple choice answers. You don't know the answer, you have to find the answer for the reading. So that's not always possible either. So, okay, that's good too. So in any case, we talked about the IELTS formats, and I just want to say that there are certain advantages to IELTS. There are certain very strong advantages. First of all, it's internationally accepted in all speaking countries in the world. So if you're looking for post-secondary education in a different country, or you're planning to spend 1 year in Canada and then the 1 year in the United States, you have to keep note that these tests are only valid for about 2 years. Right, so about 2 years. So I mean, if you're going for a post-secondary, but of course, if you complete a post-secondary education in Canada for 2 years, you're not going to need an IELTS for post-secondary education again, because you've already completed 2 years of post-secondary education with an exam. So you won't actually have to take it again if you finish 2 years of post-secondary education. You'll still have to do a general IELTS for PR, if that's the case. For post-secondary education, once you complete 2 years of post-secondary education in an English-speaking country, you don't have to take the exam again. So that's very good. And of course, again, there's lots of textbooks and preparation materials online. This is great. IELTS has been around for a very, very long time. So there are a lot of books and paper books you can get from the library. And, some of them are a little bit outdated. You have to get the current ones, of course. Try to keep the newest ones as much as possible. And again, it's very easy to switch to general if you already did academic. So that's really, really great, because they're almost the same. The disadvantages is that the format is very challenging, especially with the writing. I mentioned how challenging task 2 is. With IELTS task 2, if you write the wrong format or you don't answer every part of the question, you get a very low score. You can even if your grammar, your punctuation, your spelling, your vocabulary is really, really perfect. You can actually get a substantially lower score in writing just because you didn't get the right format. I know this very well because I know that a lot of people have to do IELTS, for example, when they come from the United States for permanent residency. This is actually, so even if you're coming to Canada for permanent residency, you still need to do a language requirement for permanent residency and citizenship, even if you came from an English-speaking country. So it's kind of funny to see Americans who are born and bred in America. You get some of these college professors and very professional people, CEOs, and they still have to do IELTS speaking and writing. And some of them, they get very low scores for writing because they just didn't study the format, or the format is just really tricky. And also IELTS General for citizenship, as I mentioned, for permanent resident citizenship, it's exactly the same. So, I mean, you still have to do all of those 4 sections, even though the government's only looking for listening and speaking. So, so there are certain advantages to CELPIP and IELTS. There are a lot of differences. So basically, for CELPIP, you can complete the exam very, very early. You need to schedule a separate. You don't need to schedule a separate speaking test. The whole test is in one foul swoop. You do every section. You sit down. You do it all together. What's really nice about CELPIP again is it's Canadian vocabulary. So it's Canadian vocabulary, the writing, speaking, listening, and reading. It's really very important for CELPIP's listening, especially if you're familiar with a North American accent. So it doesn't matter if you've been in Canada or United States, if you're familiar with a North American accent and North American vocabulary, if you've lived in North America for a while, topics and vocabulary are very, very familiar. All right. Also, CELPIP gives you editing tools, including spell check in the writing, which is awesome because you get a spell check in your writing. CAEL doesn't have this. IELTS obviously doesn't have this for general or for academic. You don't get a spell check. You get editing tools. You can copy and paste, but there's no spell check. And all 4 the topics in 4 sections are non-academic. So there is nothing academic whatsoever. And again, we have to remember that IELTS General and IELTS Academic are the same. So for the listening, yes, you are totally right. The listening will have academic topics, right? And again, for IELTS General, you have to wait for the entire test to be completed for you to complete. You have to wait for the full 60 minutes for the reading, full 60 minutes for the writing before you can go to the next section. So there's no place you go. You just have to sit there and maybe move your, just wait there and be patient. You can't move to the next section. And with the speaking component, you have to book the speaking component separately, and sometimes on a different day. Sometimes you have to wait for hours. And again, that British vocabulary, so you have to deal with trolleys and car parks and turnarounds. And, there's so many, there's some very unfamiliar vocabulary. For example, a trolley is a streetcar, essentially. In North America, a trolley is something you just push around when you're trying to move or you're in a supermarket. So sometimes the vocabulary can be a little bit tricky, especially the listening when you're hearing something unfamiliar. Also, I find that they have different accents. So IELTS believes that and again, this is fine for language requirements, because for both CELPIP and for IELTS, when you're examined, your accent has no bearing on your speaking results. So your accent has no impact on your result, as long as you're clear and you can be understandable, as long as you are clear and as long as you can be understood, as long as the meaning is not impacted in any way whatsoever. So with IELTS, however, with the listening components, they actually purposely introduce a variety of accents. So sometimes you'll hear a North American accent, a British accent. More commonly, you'll hear an Australian accent, or even an Indian accent, or even in the East, a Japanese or a Korean accent. Because again, IELTS is an international language, a language testing system. And so it's trying to be more inclusive of different accents. But at the same time, if you are used to a North American accent, and then suddenly it's the voices are switching from a British to an East Indian to an Australian accent, it might be a little bit more tricky for you to understand the listening component, while the CELPIP listening, it's pure North American accent, it's pure just Canadian vocabulary. So you're just used to one kind of vocabulary when you're doing these. And again, there are very few differences between IELTS and academic in general. There's some advantages if you're switching from academic to general, but then again, you still have to do quite a few academic tasks in speaking, in listening, especially in reading in terms of those questions, and in writing tasks too. You still have to do an academic task, which you don't have to do with CELPIP. And again, one great advantage with CELPIP though is for CELPIP General, which is for permanent residency and for other purposes like the ICCRC exam, you have to do listening, reading, writing, and then listening and speaking is exactly the same for General LS. But for General LS, and again, it's only $195, I believe, so it's much more cheaper than the CELPIP General. You just have to do listening and speaking, and you don't have to go through the motions of doing those writing and reading tasks as well. And for some candidates, which are doing General LS, and I know for citizenship, sometimes the language requirement, it doesn't have to be that high, and it just, pushing for that reading section and that writing section can be a little bit more stressful. And again, it takes some more time. So you have to be sitting through it, right? So it's just, and again, it costs the same for IELTS General and as well. For CAEL, I mentioned some of the similarities between CELPIP and IELTS. There are a lot of the same contrasts, right? So again, CAEL is very similar in CELPIP in the sense you can complete it a little bit faster. You don't have to schedule a separate speaking test like you have to do in IELTS. There are other things though. That format actually mimics a real classroom environment. And I'd just like to ask Anna, can you tell us a little bit more about how the CAEL mimics an actual academic environment, because this is really interesting.
Sure. Well, the thing is for CAEL, I think in other slides you'll be able to see sort of the format of the CAEL test. It is basically done by topics. So CAEL is very different than an IELTS test. IELTS, you have the 4 modules, but for CAEL, it's done by topics, and there's actually 5 sections. The first section is the only independent speaking, and there's only 3 questions for the speaking portion there. And then the other 4 are based on a specific topic. And usually because CAEL is an academic test, the topics will be about, it could be about any social or arts topics. It could be engineering, it could be history, geography. So there's various topics that will be included in each section. Plus, you will be doing different skills in those sections. So maybe you might have a reading section, and then you will have 1 question for the speaking about the reading that you just read. So if you are in a classroom setting and you are given a text to read, so you read it in classroom, you might have afterwards, after reading it, you might have sort of a classroom discussion about it. So it mimics that type of setting because now you're discussing the topic you just read. Or if you're given for homework to read a certain topic and then you have to write a summary, that will be one of the sections that you're doing in the test as well, where you're doing a reading section, maybe even a listening section, and then you're writing about what you just read or what you just heard. So it's meant to be something that is more realistic in terms of the actual activities that you do.
Okay, Perfect. And again, one of the nice things about CAEL is that these are integrated topics. So you listen to something and maybe you write something. You read something and then you write about it. And these are very classroom specific. This is something that you do in a college class, right? So for the listening, like for example, you're listening and then you're writing about it, right? Or you're listening something and you're speaking about it, which is really, really great. But with the IELTS, even for the IELTS academic, the format does not simulate a classroom environment. For example, the listening test, you're listening and then you're filling the blanks. There is no class activity in a post-secondary education level where you're listening to a teacher speak and then you're filling in the blanks or doing multiple choice answers. It just doesn't happen, right? There's a lot of complaints that I've heard from professors that they actually didn't like the format of the listening IELTS because it doesn't really train students which for listening in the classroom, which is actually why the CAEL was created, I believe. And who made CAEL? Do you remember?
Yes, that was Jana Fox.
Jana Fox, right? Yeah.
Yes. And then it was just basically her vision to create something a bit more realistic, more towards people going into post-secondary education. And so these tests were created. Initially, it used to be a paper-based test, but then Paragon acquired the test and they have put a lot of research into it, and they were able to make this completely computerized version of the test. And I think one of the benefits here is that even the topics that are given, you don't need to be an expert. It's just like reading an article for the first time. And many people, when you go into a classroom, you're not an expert. You have to learn things. So it's that type of skill is just basically understanding, knowing what you're reading, and then being able to respond to a question about that.
Right. So some of the things I read about Jana Fox actually and heard from her was that basically this test was designed basically to address the issue of many students coming from and passing the IELTS academic, but not actually performing well in the post-secondary classroom, which is why most professors in post-secondary education prefer CAEL over IELTS, and why Canadian universities actually prefer CAEL. And again, there's the kind of reason why post-secondary education institutions might prefer CAEL over IELTS. And I guess one of those reasons is actually a Canadian test. So if you're taking IELTS, then you're kind of like, looking at different options. Do I want to come to Canada? Do I want to go to another country? But if you're taking CAEL, it's because you're really dedicated to study in Canada. So, and again, it's something that it makes you look more committed on your application for a post-secondary study permit, that you're saying, yeah, I really want to study in Canada. Studying Canada is my dream. It's not like an alternative that I have where I'm just going to go here and I'm going to move somewhere else. I'm really planning for this. That's why I'm doing the CAEL. And again, apart from the format aspect, it is a Canadian test. What's also interesting about CAEL is that you can use CAEL for a variety of Canadian standards. For example, the ICCRC test, the Immigration Consultancy exam. You can take CAEL, you can take CELPIP General, you can do a CAN test as well, which is it's a different test entirely. I'm not particularly a big fan of it myself, but it's still something you can do. And again, it's the IELTS academic, but not the IELTS general. So in a sense, just because the Canadian government is accepting CELPIP General and CAEL, it kind of shows you that they're favoring the Canadian standards of language proficiency examinations more than the British one, as they're not accepting the IELTS General, which is so similar to the IELTS academic format, but they'll accept the academic IELTS format. Again, if you're doing ICCRC and you're basically studying to deal with clients, doing an purely academic test is a little bit more, it requires a lot more preparation. Whereas the CELPIP and CAEL, it's a little bit more straightforward, not only because CELPIP is more general, but also because CAEL is a little bit more of an imitation of a classroom setting where you actually have less preparation that you need to do because of the different kinds of questions. What's also cool about CAEL, though, I want to mention this is really cool. CAEL is the only test we're going to talk about now that you actually can do at home. So with CELPIP and with IELTS, general and academic, you have to go to a CELPIP center, right? Well, now even with the CELPIP LS or CELPIP general, you have to be in a actual test center, do it on a computer there. You can do the whole thing. But with CAEL, you can do CAEL from the privacy of your own home, which is awesome. So actually you have an invigilator who's watching you through your camera. There are certain things that you have to do. You actually have to get a little whiteboard in order to take notes. You're not allowed to take notes on paper. There's some variants there. And again, if you guys have any questions later today about the differences about CAEL, please guys write them in the Q&A.
Yes, just let us know.
Today. But yeah, CAEL is the only test you can do from home so far. I believe Paragon is planning to transition the CELPIP to a version that you can do at home?
Well, that's in the works. Again, to have that be approved by the government may be challenging, so we don't know what will happen. But I mean, it's something that we are always hoping. But for the moment, CAEL is accepted. And if you do decide to do it at home, the universities and colleges will accept the test. It's not a temporary fix. Like there are other tests out there that they'll accept it temporarily. But this one, if you actually do it at home or at a test center, the universities and colleges in Canada will accept the test. And the cost of the test is exactly the same. It's 280 plus tax. So, I mean, it's a great benefit. And if you are in a different country, which we are currently hosting, for example, in the US, in Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Japan, if you are in a different country there, they can also take the test at home. So there's quite a few benefits, and hopefully we'll be able to extend that to other countries as well.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a great option for anyone who's at high risk of COVID or anyone who just wants to take this at home. It's the only post-secondary language requirement examination that you can take from the privacy at home. Huge advantage there for CAEL. So I would love to see both IELTS and CELPIP to kind of, step up and do it. And again, government regulations is something that might stop the production of those tests. But at least for now, post-secondary education does have trust in CAEL, again, in Canada. It shows the trust that Canadian universities and colleges have in CAEL to allow this test to be done online. The other thing I think about CAEL that I want to say is that it has a different band structure. Now, I just want to mention that in IELTS, with IELTS, you have to get 7 listening, reading, speaking, and writing to get an overall band 7. But not in all post-secondary institutions, but I've heard in some post-secondary institutions, you can actually get a lower score in some areas like listening and reading, and then, and still get an overall of a band 70, which is what you need to get to gain access to some of the top post-secondary education institutions in Canada, like U of T, for example.
Right. So for the CAEL test, the scoring is just a little slightly different. For IELTS, usually you can have, for example, 0.5. So if it's 6.5, 7.5, ours is just, it's over 90. So like the IELTS, it's over 9. But in the case here, we don't have 0.5 scores. So in the case, if you were to get a 65 overall, for example, your score will be bumped up to 70.
Wow.
So it really depends on the sections, and I would highly recommend that if you are serious about doing the CAEL test, to go into the institution website to see what the scoring will be, because it does differ from institution to institution. So sometimes they'll require, for example, a 7 in the listening, 7 in the reading sections, but no less than a 60 in the writing and speaking. But again, each institution will be very different, so it's always best to double check, but there are certain advantages to doing this test as well.
Well, yes, and so it's nice to see CAEL averaging, like rounding up instead of like the way IELTS does it, which is rounded down. So if you get 0.5 in one of the sections, you're all 0.5 all across. So you,
Right. So
yeah,
it is slightly different.
yeah, it is
Yeah, and
slightly
the
different.
scoring really depends on the institutions. Many universities will require
Yeah.
an overall average of 70, and for colleges, it's usually 60, but then that could really change depending on what you're studying. So
Mhm.
you would have to double check on that.
Yeah, but then again, even if you're if university is looking for 70, but you get about 65, you're getting 70. So which is
As an overall score, yeah.
overall score, which is great.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the CAEL test format. I think we talked a little bit about it. Anna,
Yes.
do you want to add anything about CAEL format?
So this is just to give you the actual sections. So as I mentioned before, the speaking is the only independent speaking with the 3 questions. And then for the integrated reading, you'll have a short reading, which is only 3 questions. And then you'll have a long reading of 11 questions. And then you'll have 1 speaking question about the long reading. So again, you don't have to memorize any of the information. It's just basically understanding and being able to respond to the question. The listening is the same. There's two listening parts. There's a short listening of 3 questions, a long listening of 11 questions, and then you have 1 speaking question about the long listening. And again, it's made, like if it's about deforestation, the whole topic will be based on the same thing. So then it actually allows you to understand a little bit better. And one of the great things is when you do have that speaking question about the reading, you will have access to the reading section. And for the listening, when you have that speaking question about the listening you just heard, there will be a short summary about the listening. So there will be bullet points about the listening just to help you remember some of the information you may have
Wow.
missed.
Oh,
So it's
that's
really beneficial. And you can also look at the questions ahead of time. So there is time to look at the questions beforehand. There's time to respond to the questions. And at the end, you can review the questions as well. So there's quite a few
so
little
CAEL
things
actually does
that
the
are great.
listening. So CAEL does the listening notes for you in a sense.
Yes, not while you're
Wow.
doing the listening
Yeah,
section. Obviously, you'll just listen to it once and then respond with the multiple choice questions.
yeah.
But when you have that speaking question, you will have access to the bullet points of the listening you just heard. So
Quick,
it's a great advantage.
quick question for CAEL. Is it all multiple choice or are there various question types?
Most of it is multiple choice, and there are various types of multiple choice where you have like a single multiple choice response. Sometimes you could have a multiple answer response, and they'll say you need to respond, you need to select 3 answers. So
Mhm.
there are various types of multiple choice, but most of them is the regular multiple choice questions, and you may have a fill in the blanks somewhere there, but it's not predominant in the test, but you may have 1 or
Okay.
2 fill in the blanks in there.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. I've actually learned about this. I don't know if you can tell us more about this. Is there's an actual scholarship if you're taking?
Yes, it's actually a scholarship for international students. So anybody who is in a different country, or if they are here, they are eligible to apply for the scholarship. Now, there is a minimum that you need to obtain for the scholarship to apply for the scholarship, and you need to have an average of 70. Now,
Mhm.
if you are here in Canada and you are selected as the winner, you will have $4,000 towards your scholarship, the same as the international student that's in a different country. If they're selected, then they will have $4,000 that goes towards their education. And for the second runner-up, it's $500 here in Canada and $500 internationally. So that makes up the 10,000 in total. But
Okay.
it's a great opportunity, and I was actually very um, sort of happy last time that one of my students at that time, she was the one who won the scholarship. So
Really?
it was just a fantastic moment because she took one of our boot camp classes that at that time we were offering for free, and she went through the week and she ended up winning. And she was here in Toronto from Italy, but she was here in Toronto studying here, and she took the test. She did very well in the test. I think she got an 80 in the test, 80 over 90, but she
Oh.
was the one who was selected here. So it was a very happy moment for her.
And how many students per year are selected for this $10,000?
There are 4 students that are selected. So there's 2 first prize winners, one that's an international student in Canada and an international student abroad. And then for the second prize, it's $500 in the same here and internationally.
Okay. Okay. Well, still, it's good.
Yeah.
All right. So at this point, I'm going to open things up to the Q&A. So I want to specifically look at some of the Q&A questions that we're answering here. And one of the questions that I have already is, we're getting lots of questions around here, but one of the questions I have here is, can you combine the results of self-examination? So for example, if I took a CELPIP once and I got, let's say, a band 9 in speaking and band 9 in reading, but then I got a band 7 in listening and writing. And then I took the CELPIP again, and then maybe I got a CELPIP listening 8, or, you know, can I combine? So like take the band 9 for my writing and speaking from my first attempt, and take the band from listening and reading from my second attempt, and combine it to a solid band 9 from both tests.
Well, if we're talking about are we specifically talking about the general test or the academic?
Well, let's go with the CELPIP general, right? Which is, yeah, there's just
I'll get Patrick to respond to that one, and then I'll go back to the CAEL after.
Okay, Patrick, can we combine more than one CELPIP attempt and sort of seek to combine one solid band? I'll give you a different, simpler example. I did a CELPIP one time for CELPIP general, and I got band 9 in reading, listening, speaking, and I got band 7 in writing. On my second attempt, I got band 8 in listening, reading, and writing, but I got a band 9 in my writing. Can I combine both of those tests to get a solid band 9 in all sections?
That's a great question. So it actually depends on what the purpose is that you need to take the test. So I know for immigration or government purposes, i.e. citizenship or for PR, the government does not allow you to meet the score requirement across 2 tests. So you do have to meet the full score requirement for all 4 sections on one single test. Mm-hmm. But if you're, for example, I know another common reason people take the test is to become a licensed immigration consultant in Canada. So the regulatory body, ICCRC, that you send your results to, they actually do accept you to take, to meet the score requirement across 2 different tests. So you submit 2 score reports, and as long as you met the requirement for each section across 2 reports, then you're okay. So it really comes down to the reason why you're taking it. But if you're taking it for permanent residency or citizenship in Canada, you'll have to meet all of the score requirements in one test report.
Wow, okay. And what about real estate license? Can you do that as well?
I would say as a general rule, if you're not sure, contact the institution itself. So contact the real estate council and ask them if this is acceptable. And they would be able to give you the answer.
Okay, so you have to ask the regulatory body it needs that particular exam in order to make sure. But is it also possible to combine, let's say, an IELTS and a CELPIP score together?
Has to be the same test, so you can only combine 2 CELPIP tests. CAEL actually has an average, so you're not able to combine 2 CAEL tests.
I see. Okay, that's good. I knew I'm going to get this question today, so let's go ahead and ask it anyway. Which test is the easiest?
The $1 million question. I would just say, everybody's different. Everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. So just kind of learn the format, know your options. We have the free online sample tests for both CAEL and CELPIP, where those mimic the real test formats. So take them both, and that'll give you a really good feel of, how does CAEL feel versus CELPIP and vice versa. So just educate yourself on the options. This is one great way to do that. Attend a workshop. And there's no one size fits all answer for everybody. So it depends on your own unique traits and characteristics. So just learn the format and
yeah, you're just saying, as you're talking about practice tests, I've heard about this. You could take a pre-test for CELPIP and CAEL. It costs like $50, and then you get $50 off when you do the real test. Do you guys still have this?
We were offering this pre-pandemic, post, yes, but I mean pre-pandemic. Before the pandemic hit, we were offering this. Unfortunately, currently we are not.
Right.
But I do believe maybe in Vancouver they may have already started that, but that is only for the CAEL test, not for the CELPIP test. So if you were to do a pre-test for CAEL, just to try it out to see how it is, you are able to go directly to the test center to book a test, a pre-test. You do it, and then that you will receive $50 off for CELPIP or CAEL.
Can you do a pre-test from home?
No, unfortunately not. They only offer it currently in Vancouver, and it's only done at their test centers that they have selected. So we were offering this in Toronto before, but then once COVID hit, that was it. Right now, we are so booked with the regular test that we're unable to offer that for the moment. But when it happens, we'll let people know about that.
Okay, we got another question here. We're going to have tons. Does CAEL qualify you for post-secondary education outside of Canada in any country?
Now, CAEL, you are able to do it in other countries, as I mentioned, like Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, but currently it's not being accepted at post-secondary institutions, although we are working on that right now to see, to try to get acceptance in other countries.
Okay, so this is just for Canadian studies. Yeah.
That's right. Currently, it's just for Canada.
Okay, good. There's a question here, and for I guess another question here. Some of the CELPIP study materials that we have online, is it possible to ever encounter any of the CELPIP questions from the practice materials in the actual real CELPIP test?
Well, the topics will vary. You won't get the identical question, but you will have the format will be the same. That won't change, but you will have very similar questions. So for example, like in the speaking section, there will be one area where you will have to describe a picture, and you will always describe a picture in that section. It's just the picture, the images will vary, but it's the same sort of type of concept that you have to focus on. Or you might describe an event that happened to you in the past, or like a memorable experience. And it will always be a question about your past. So some of the questions are quite similar, but the topic may change.
What about for the writing section? Because I had one of my clients that did a CELPIP test 1 year ago, and the CELPIP question for task 2 was actually the same task 2 question as in the first practice test in the CELPIP practice materials.
Well, that's fantastic. I haven't heard about that, but I think it's great because they usually try to do something similar. So, I mean, as I mentioned, some of the type of questions you get in the reading could be like a letter of complaint. The topic may change slightly, but maybe you're complaining not about the food, but you're complaining about something else. You're complaining about the noise level instead of complaining about the type of food you ate. So the way you are writing or describing might be somewhat similar, but obviously, again, topics may vary. And if you do get something that is the same or very similar to the questions that you have in the practice test, that's amazing.
So I have another question about CELPIP. Again, very popular test. Maybe you guys can help me with this. But how long is the CELPIP test again? It's 3 hours exactly?
3 hours, yeah.
3 hours exactly. But I know that when you're doing a CELPIP test, which is listening, reading, speaking, and writing, sometimes you're going to get, let's say, 2 task 2s for listening, or 2 task 3s for reading. And that's because some of these tasks are experimental questions. And so they're not going to be evaluated. Wouldn't that make the test longer then?
Yeah, like you typically you'll get it's like you'll get an additional part, so it's the same part, like it might be, you know, part 3 listening for viewpoints, but you'll get 2 of them. So you'll usually get one or the other in the listening or the reading section. So don't be alarmed, it's not a technical issue. It would make the test slightly a bit longer, like the practice test does not have that included in it, but you might get the same part twice. It's not a glitch. We're just basically, it's called an unscored item.
Mm-hmm.
So we're basically testing a question on how people perform on it to be used in a future test as a scored question, if that makes sense. So don't be alarmed. You won't know what which question is unscored. It's going to feel like a regular scored question. So just do your best to answer both of the parts with equal effort, because you won't know what the unscored item is out of the 2 identical parts.
Okay, I have a question for the IELTS here, and here is, okay, so how many examiners are doing the reading part for IELTS? Okay, yeah, it's just one examiner. For the IELTS, it's actually one examiner for the reading and one examiner for the speaking. And the good thing is it's not the same person. And so for the writing, one examiner is doing writing task 1 and one examiner is doing writing task 2. What about for CELPIP? Is it one examiner for writing as well and one examiner for speaking as well?
Well, in total, you have 2 to 3 examiners that are rating the full test. So it's the full section of the test. So if it's speaking, it's 2 to 3 examiners. For writing, it's 2 to 4 examiners, depending on how many sections are being graded. But the listening and the reading, that's done by computer. So that's not done with another person. So yeah. I don't know if Patrick wants to add anything else, but
yeah, Patrick.
Yeah. The only thing that came to mind with that is, so if you wanted to contest a score that you got in a given section,
right,
you're much better off contesting a speaking or a writing score, because those are human scored. They're scored by actual people, actual raters. Whereas the listening and reading sections, they are multiple choice format in CELPIP. So the computer will just recheck it and it will be the same result. So you just be wasting time and money. So just only reevaluate or remark, we call it reevaluate, the speaking or the writing sections if you don't feel the score you received is what you felt you deserved.
So you can't appeal a listening or a reading section, right?
There is an option on the website, but we advise test takers against it. Just because of the format of the answering. It is multiple choice, so more than likely your results will not, it wouldn't change. It wouldn't change your score for either section.
I guess if there were any experimental questions or test questions, they might look at your performance there and listen. But for listening and reading, there would be little point to try to contest listening and reading, but for speaking and writing, it's a little bit more likely. How much does it cost to have it reevaluated? So let's say I had my speaking was 8 and I needed a 9. How much would it cost for speaking or for writing to be reevaluated?
So it is $55 Canadian plus tax per component. So if you were to get 2 components, it would be double that. But having said that, if the score goes up for a given section, you're refunded for reevaluating that individual component.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So you would pay $55 if you got it reevaluated, but if you moved up, and you'd get your money back. And I know that one client actually did that, and he did get the score that he needed. So it does actually work. So it's so that's good. We've answered quite a few of the questions that I have, and a lot of the questions throughout, I think we've pretty much answered here. So if there are any other final questions here, any more burning questions for us, this is a chance for you guys to answer to get any of your questions about IELTS, CELPIP, CAEL answered today.
I think we got another one. How far in advance should I study for my English test?
Okay, that's a good idea.
Well, how about we get Mache, because he's the expert for instructors and for students.
Generally speaking, I get a lot of clients that are enrolling in my programs pretty late. They're waiting for the absolute last moment. They're procrastinating. One thing that I would advise is it's a very good idea, for example, if you're preparing for CELPIP, IELTS, or CAEL, to purchase as many preparation materials as you can. But just robotically trying to go through the practice materials without any strategies is a really bad choice, especially for some of my CELPIP students. They purchased the full, I believe there are now 8 sets of practice CELPIP tests available right now. So in each set, there's 2 practice tests. So you can basically take, 16 different exams, right? And I know some students that just get to it. They do all of those 16 tests and they're not doing very well. And then they want to take some lessons, but then they're run out of materials to practice with. So then they're just, practicing materials that they've already done before. They remember some of the questions, so they're not practicing it. So my advice is usually, yes, purchase those materials. I believe for CAEL, it's 50% off now.
Yes, for Canada Day, it's 50% off. So it's today, Wednesday, tomorrow, Canada Day, until Friday, July 2nd. There is a promotion going on. It's 50% off all materials, whether it's test or books. It's 50% off. So take advantage.
Just for CAEL or for CELPIP?
No, for both. For
both.
And CAEL.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's amazing. Because the full, so it's like $75 instead of $150. Okay, that's a really good deal. So good. Okay, happy Canada Day for us all. Okay, that's good. And again, I advise that if you purchase these materials, don't jump the gun, don't get to it. My recommendation is 6 weeks minimum. 4 weeks for intensive preparation, and then 2 weeks for practice. And book as quickly as you can. I know CAEL is a lot easier to book. You can get it almost right away. But with CELPIP, I think there's a waiting list of at least 2 months now, I believe. Especially,
I think it depends on the area that you are taking the test, but we do have tests that you can take even until as soon as next week if you're searching for a test. But always check your area to see what's available, because I think in Toronto you do have the opportunity to take the test right away, but there are other regions where there's less availability, so it's always best to double check.
Yeah, for Toronto, there is availability beginning of July, first week, which is a couple days. So I think next weekend you can take a test in Toronto for us.
So my advice is always book the test as soon as possible. Yes, do get some materials, whether it's IELTS, CELPIP, or CAEL, but learn strategies. Even if you are a native language speaker and you attempt IELTS, CELPIP, or CAEL, you may not actually do so well if you don't know what you're doing. There are certain strategies and techniques that you need to master in order to push yourself to the highest score possible. And if you're a native language speaker and you're looking for this exam for ICCRC, your Law Society of Canada, or your real estate license, or any other standards where you need to get a language test requirement, yes, do prepare. Do not be too confident in yourself just because you have your English is very good. You do actually need to prepare because there's a certain format and you might find it tricky, and there are techniques that you need to learn through this. So
what happens if there's somebody who's not sure how much time they need to prepare? Do you have some type of consultation where people can book a consultation with you sort of to go through it and to understand how much time is necessary for them to pass these tests?
Absolutely. I always, yes, if you go to my website, you can fill out the free course inquiry. Of course, you don't need your credit card. You just fill out the course inquiry. I will be able to get back to you. And you can always book a free 30-minute consultation and diagnostic. So we actually we ask you a few questions, especially if you're speaking and you're writing, to see what your general level is. And so we can provide a consultation using the diagnostic tools that we have, but also looking at the past history. How was your past experience? How many times you've actually attempted the test and what your previous scores were. So we're always happy to provide a free 30-minute consultation to anyone who's interested in any of our programs, or just interested in learning more about CAEL and CELPIP and what kind of needs they have. And so we're going to finish off here. Just want to remind everybody that if you're interested in any of our videos, if you enjoyed this webinar, you can check out my YouTube channel at Summerhill Online Academy on YouTube. And you can see some of the previous workshops and webinars, including for speaking, writing, listening, reading, for CAEL, and for CELPIP General. So you can take a look at some of our free workshops that we've had in the past. They're all available on YouTube. This video will also be on YouTube in a couple of days after being live. So just go ahead and subscribe. And again, July 5th, we're starting our new semester. We have courses on the beginning of each month. And so for July 5th, if you're interested in CELPIP, IELTS, or CAEL preparation, we have an intensive 4-week course. It's a group course. It's $650, includes original materials produced by Summerhill Online Academy in collaboration with Paragon Testing Enterprises. And we produce original materials with a live teacher of small classes of up to 10 students in each Zoom class. These are live 2-hour classes a day for 4 weeks straight. These are 40 hours of classes for $650. So these complete courses for CELPIP, IELTS, and CAEL are available every month. And the start date for the next course is July 5. So if you're interested in CELPIP and CAEL, hurry and register as soon as you can to join our courses next month. So thank you so much for attending today. And I'd like to thank Anna and Patrick for joining us for another workshop. I hope that we've been able to answer most of your questions. And again, if you have any questions, please send Anna and Patrick an email at info@celpip.ca, or you can check out, you can ask me questions as well. You can email me by looking at finding my website at www.summerhillonlineacademy.com, and you can book a free consultation with me, and I can answer any questions that you have that I haven't answered already. So thank you very much for attending, everybody.
Well, thank you for having us today. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and hopefully next time we'll be together soon again.
Okay, well, thank you so much.